So I drive a lot, and I'm kind of over motels. They're all just kind of very samey and corporate, and they're not very memorable. They all blend together. So I've been making a point recently to shell out a little bit of extra money to stay in cool hotels. Nothing fancy or too posh, just interesting places that are memorable and that have a history. Well, I stopped off in Staunton, Virginia, right off of I-81, and I came to this hotel that clearly had a history. I mean, this building was historic, it was grand, and when I went into the front desk, I picked up this paper that kind of went over the history and facts of the building. And I saw something here that said that this was the Western State Hospital from 1828 to 1976. And well, now I'm just really curious to see what the Western State Hospital was. So I'm going to do some Googling. All right, Western State Hospital. Okay, click on that. Western State Hospital, called Western State Lunatic Asylum in its early years, is a hospital for the mentally ill. Oh. Huh. As soon as I realized I was staying the night in a former mental hospital run by a Nazi doctor from a Confederate family, I knew I had to thoroughly explore the property. It was late at night at this point, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. But don't worry, I wasn't alone. My friend Sal was there to protect me. At first glance, the hotel betrays none of its sordid past, besides a brief, carefully worded line in the fact sheet I picked up at the front desk. I get the sense that hotel management is not keen to advertise this history. The hospital lay abandoned for years before it was refurbished and converted into a hotel, and in the process, the history of the building was whitewashed, quite literally. Only a thin coat of paint separates the past from the present here. And it seems like everywhere you turn in this place, the past is struggling to break through that thin and uncertain barrier, to lurch, howling and biting, into our tranquil, modern world. Many of the rooms were quite clearly cells at one point, but whether this was original to the Western State era or added during the building's brief stint as a medium security prison in the late 20th century, I can't say. Our room was in the basement, with walls of weathered brickwork that looked at least as old as the Civil War. The white paint doesn't do much to pretty up these walls. It's like makeup on a corpse. The bones of the hospital are still here, including most of the fixtures of Victorian architecture which make the building so striking. Climbing to the top floor, Sal and I discovered a beautiful spiral staircase leading to an open-air cupola, which boasted panoramic views of Stanton, which I've since learned is the proper pronunciation of the name of the town, so sorry about that. It was here we discovered that Western State Hospital was not just a single building, but a major complex. Running back downstairs, we went outside and circled around the other buildings, which still lay fallow. It seems like the hotel was the only part of the complex that had been remodeled. At length we came face to face with DeJarnette Sanatorium, the ward which bears the name of our erstwhile Nazi doctor. Joseph DeJarnette, scion of the antebellum planter class, the son and nephew of prominent Confederates, and Virginia's most ardent eugenicist. In 1920, DeJarnette summed up his eugenicist beliefs in a poem titled Mendel's Law, in reference to the pioneering work of Gregor Mendel, the father of genetic science.
This is the law of Mendel, and often he makes it plain. Defectives will breed defectives, and the insane breed insane. Oh, why do we allow these people to breed back to the monkey's nest, to increase our country's burdens, when we should breed from the good and the best? Oh, you wise men, take up the burden, and make this your loudest creed. Sterilize the misfits promptly, all not fit to breed. Then our race will be strengthened and bettered, and our men and our women be blessed. Not apish, repulsive, and foolish, for we should breed from the good and the best.
Much of what is written online about DeJarnette and Western State Hospital takes on the tenor of a horror story, which I'm clearly not immune to. I mean, come on, look at this place. However, despite his Nazi sympathies, Joseph DeJarnette was no Adolf Hitler. He wasn't sadistic or vindictive. Like many American scientists of his time, he truly believed that eugenics was the answer to many of society's problems. DeJarnette saw eugenics as the key to a utopian future, where mental illness and low intelligence would be bred out of the human population entirely. The good doctor believed in that future so strongly, in fact, that he had actively campaigned for 16 years to get a state law on the books allowing state-enforced sterilization. His efforts paid off in 1924 with the passage of the Virginia Sterilization Act, a law which remained on the books for half a century. When the constitutionality of the law was questioned in the Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell, DeJarnette's testimony helped tip the ruling in the eugenicists' favor, a ruling, by the way, that has never been officially overturned. Today, eugenics is widely regarded as pseudoscience, and its forcible implementation by the state in the 20th century is condemned as deeply unethical. It doesn't figure in many tellings of American history, but the mandatory sterilizations of people Dr. DeJarnette referred to as defectives, mainly alcoholics, the quote-unquote feeble-minded, people with chronic medical conditions like epilepsy and the mentally ill, this remains one of the most shockingly authoritarian policies an American government has ever inflicted upon its own citizens. As the name suggests, Western State Hospital was a state-sponsored government institution. From 1924 to 1979, the state of Virginia sterilized about 50,000 people, mostly against their will. Only California can boast of higher numbers. Western State was the site of the second highest rate of sterilizations in Virginia, and DeJarnette claimed to have personally sterilized 600 people during his 38-year superintendence. Most victims of forced sterilization before World War II were women. But the horror movie image that comes to mind, of a mad scientist gleefully taking a knife to the genitals of a screaming, restrained victim, is inaccurate. The reality was, in my opinion, far more chilling. Not only was Joseph DeJarnette a highly respected scientist among his peers, he went out of his way to make life at the hospital comfortable for the so-called defectives under his charge. He often wrote to patients' families updating them on their loved one's progress, and in their replies, the families praised DeJarnette for his thoughtfulness, dedication, and care. DeJarnette didn't just think mandatory sterilization was best for society as a whole. He thought it was best for the defective people he was sterilizing. At the time, patients were kept institutionalized for long periods, often years, after they had found ways to manage their illnesses, mainly because it was feared that they would reproduce and pass their genes for addiction or mental illness or whatever else onto the next generation. Therefore, per medical guidelines, forced sterilization was the best way to discharge reformed patients quickly and get them back to their normal lives. As DeJarnette explained in an annual report to the board of directors of the hospital,
"In my mind, sterilization is by far the kindest and best method to render the unfit to live on the outside, to make a living and have a social life not very different from his more fortunate brother."
This had the added benefit of saving the state money, as it no longer had to feed or house these people. DeJarnette also argued that it would save taxpayer money in the long term, too, since according to the eugenical theory, any children these patients had would inevitably become a burden on the state as well. As DeJarnette wrote in one letter,
I have already sterilized 45 defective people from the county of Montgomery, including 14 children out of a family of 17, and on a moderate estimate will have saved the county of Montgomery in the next 100 years over $4 million, besides raising the mentality of the citizens of the country. By sterilizing this class, we will certainly raise the average intelligence of our citizens, and will save the state enormous expenses.
But of course, any attempt by institutions of power to reshape the human race, however benevolently intended, is going to reflect the biases and prejudices of those institutions. And in the early 20th century, the height of Jim Crow, not just here in the South, but nationwide, the institutions of power were thoroughly identified with the philosophy of white supremacy, and informed by a primitive scientific understanding of neurodivergence and mental health. Eugenic science was championed by wealthy white American men of Western European descent, and was primarily inflicted upon women, the poor, the uneducated, and marginalized communities. The irreversible decision to forcibly sterilize a patient hinged on the competence of the attending physician. In the 1980s, when sterilized people began to sue the Virginia state hospitals that had forced them to undergo their operations, a U.S. district court ruled that there was cause to believe that many doctors had conducted surgical sterilization without informing patients of their medical statuses, or without giving them the option of alternative treatments. Additionally, historians have found compelling evidence that countless sterilizations were carried out on the basis of false diagnoses, and performed on people without mental handicaps of any kind. Though the whole eugenics movement was characterized by junk science, bigotry, and ignorance, it's hard not to think of it in retrospect as a tool of control. DeJarnette may not have been a cackling maniac, but in my personal opinion, he was no less of a monster. His warm bedside manner and genuine care for his patients doesn't make what he did to them any more ethical. Like his slave-owning parents and grandparents, he invented justifications about how the people he controlled needed him, and about how his control was in their best interest. But the cold, hard truth is, there's no nice way to plant your boot on someone's neck. It didn't matter that DeJarnette thought he was doing the right thing. It didn't matter if he had convinced his patients that what he was doing to them would help them become a better person and make the world a better place. The only thing that matters is that they didn't have a choice.